Keeping New York History Alive. This is Bonnie Wood, reading from Christian Schultz Jr.'s book, Travels on an Inland Voyage. On the map, he is also listed as not only the author, but the cartographer. And he drew this map of the United States. And of course, we have just here a clipping of it. And we can see that his father, the immigrant, the Palatine immigrant, arrived here in Philadelphia. And Christian Schultz is describing going up the Hudson, which, by the way, here is Rhinebeck, spelled R-Y-N-B-E-C-K, to the Troy, Schenectady area, and then going on the Mohawk, passing such places as the Cohoes, here, the Little Falls, Utica, Herkimer, quite a few towns he's describing along the way. So it's basically along this route is where he's going. And as I'm reading, you will be able to spot those places. He begins by saying, "Dear friend, agreeably to your request and my promise, I now commence sketching for your amusement the few hasty observations I have made on my voyage to this place. Yet, as these will neither be very new nor interesting to you, who are equally well informed as to the state of improvements thus far, I shall occasionally introduce such little incidents as may occur on my voyage, being satisfied with the sincerity of your avowal, that anything from me will be acceptable. You desired me to be particular in describing the several towns and streams I pass on my route, the respective distances between them, the time occupied and manner of traveling from one to another, as well as an account of the expenses, risks, and dangers to be incurred in an inland voyage of the kind I am now performing. All these I shall endeavor to attend to in their proper time and place, and should I fail in affording you all the satisfaction or amusement you may have anticipated, it will not be from want of any exertion on my part. The navigation of the Hudson from New York to Albany is 160 miles, and so generally known that you cannot expect anything amusement in any account I might attempt to give you, either of the grandeur or elevation of those highlands through which we pass, or of the many flourishing towns and villages which adorn the banks of this majestic river. I shall, therefore, proceed to those particulars which you are more anxious to learn. The passage to Albany generally takes up from 2 to 5 days, and costs from $6 to $10 for each passenger, including board. The freight upon bulky merchandise is 40 cents a 100 pounds weight, but heavy articles from 25 to 50% less. From Albany, which lies in latitude 42 degrees 38 minutes north and 73 degrees 44 minutes west, to Schenectady, you have 15 miles over a very good turnpike road, and the freight over this portage is 16 cents a 100 pounds weight. Many of these wagoners are great rogues, and should you chance to have occasion for their services, it will not only be well to be very careful, but likewise to make your bargain before you employ them, or, like me, you will have to pay for learning. Schenectady is quite a large town. This is the title page of his book, and we can see here that he traveled through New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and through the territories of Indiana, Louisiana, Mississippi, and New Orleans, years 1807 to 1808, including a tour of nearly 6,000 miles. Here he is, Christian Schultz Jr., Esquire. And here we are at Schenectady. Schenectady is quite a large town, but rather small for a city, notwithstanding which I observed that the inhabitants always make use of the latter term when speaking of the place. It contains about 420 houses and is pleasantly situated on the south side of the Mohawk River, about 6 miles above the Great Cohoes. From its situation at the commencement of an extensive inland navigation, whose shores are daily increasing in wealth and population, there can be no doubt that, at a period not very far distant, Schenectady will rank as one of the first interior cities of the United States. The freight from Schenectady to Utica, a distance of 104 miles by water, is 75 cents a hundredweight. The carriage by land is the same. This is owing to the great number of wagons loaded with produce which enter the cities of Albany and Schenectady, where, having discharged their loads, rather than return empty and earn nothing, they are glad to take a freight at the rate of water carriage. The Schoharie River, a rapid and innavigable stream, falls into the Mohawk from the south side at a place called the Mohawk Flats at Fort Hunter, about 25 miles above Schenectady. Canada Creek is a considerable stream of water, which takes its rise in a hilly, broken country near the headwaters of Black River. It empties itself into the Mohawk on the north side at a place called the Herkimer Flats. The Tuckonodoc, the Korogi, and Lower Canada Creeks on the north side, and the Kanajihari, Otsquatch, Saquet, and Oriskany Creeks on the south side are all small and trifling streams, which afford but a partial supply to the main river. You will please to observe, as a general rule in future, that in all my references with respect to the rivers and watercourses, I shall use the terms right and left, as the frequent windings and sudden turns of the rivers render it almost impossible to give the true bearings without a constant reference to the compass. I have noticed but 3 different kinds of boats used in navigating this river. Those called Schenectady boats are generally preferred and will carry about 10 tons burthen when the river is high, but when it is low, as at this time, they will not take more than from 3 to 4. They generally advance against the stream at the rate of from 18 to 20 or 25 miles a day. These boats are built very much after the model of our Long Island round-bottomed skiffs, proportionally larger, being from 40 to 50 feet in length and steered by a large swing oar of the same length. They have likewise a movable mast in the middle. When the wind serves, they set a square sail and topsail, which at a few miles' distance give them all the appearance of small, square-rigged vessels coming down before the wind. Our galley, which I am just now informed is called the Mohawk Regulator, has gone at the rate of 6 miles an hour against the stream. And during this time, believe me, nothing can be more charming than sailing on the Mohawk. It is not often, however, that a fair wind will serve for more than 3 or 4 miles together, as the irregular course of the river renders its aid very precarious. Their chief dependence, therefore, is upon their pike poles. These are generally from 18 to 22 feet in length, having a sharp pointed iron with a socket weighing 10 or 12 pounds affixed to the lower end. The upper has a large knob called a button mounted upon it so that the poleman may press upon it with his whole weight without endangering his person. This manner of impelling the boat forward is extremely laborious, and none but those who have been for some time accustomed to it can manage these poles with any kind of advantage. Within the boat on each side is fixed a plank running fore and aft, with a number of cross cleats nailed upon it, for the purpose of giving the polemen a sure footing in hard poling. The men, after setting their poles against a rock, bank, or bottom of the river, declining their heads very low, place the upper end or button against the back part of their right or left shoulders. according to the side on which they may be poling. Then falling down on their hands and toes, creep the whole length of the gangboards and send the boat forward with considerable speed. The first sight of 4 men on each side of a boat, creeping along on their hands and toes, apparently transfixed by a huge pole, is no small curiosity, nor was it until I had observed their perseverance for 200 or 300 yards that I became satisfied they were not playing some pranks. From the general practice of this method, as likewise from my own trials and observation, I am convinced that they have fallen upon the most powerful way possible to exert their bodily strength for the purpose required. The position, however, was so extremely awkward to me that I doubt whether the description I have attempted will give you an adequate idea of the procedure. I have met with another kind of boat on this river, which is called a dorm or dorum. How it is spelt, I know not. The only difference I could observe in this from the former one is that it is built sharp at both ends and generally much larger and stouter. They have likewise flats, similar to those you have seen on the Susquehanna, but much lighter, built and longer. On all these they occasionally carry the sails before mentioned. This image does appear in the book that I'm reading. The Mohawk is by no means dangerous to ascend on account of the slowness of the boat's progress, but as it is full of rocks, stones, and shallows, there is some risk in descending it of staving the boat, and at this season is so low as to require it to be dragged by hand over many places. The channel in some instances is not more than 8 feet in width, which will barely permit a boat to pass by rubbing on both sides. This is sometimes caused by natural or accidental obstructions of rocks in the channel, but oftener by artificial means. This, which at first view would appear to be an inconvenience, is produced by 2 lines or ridges of stone, generally constructed on sandy, gravelly, or stony shallows, in such a manner as to form an acute angle were they to meet, the extremities of which widen as they extend up the river, whilst at the lower end there is just space enough left to admit the passage of a boat. The water being thus collected at the widest part of these ridges, and continually pent up within narrower limits as it descends, causes a rise at the passage, so that where the depth was no more than 8 inches before, a contrivance of this kind will raise it to 12, and strange as it may appear, a boat drawing 15 inches will pass through it with safety and ease. The cause is simply this: the boat, being somewhat below the passage, is brought forward with considerable velocity, and the moment it dashes into the passage, its resistance to the current is such as to cause a swell of 4 or 5 inches more, which affords it an easy passage over the shoal. The Mohawk may be considered as being generally about 100 yards in width. Its banks are extremely fertile, and the very appearance of the barns would satisfy a traveler that he was passing through a rich and well-cultivated country. The inhabitants are mostly of German descent, and still, in a great measure, retain their natural prejudices, and consider all who do not speak their own language either as Yankees or Irishers. The Germans of Pennsylvania generally speak a most corrupt dialect of the German language, yet when compared with that in use on the Mohawk, it may justly be styled Attic elegance. The Saxons are allowed to speak the purest of any of the Germans. And when I have been complimented as speaking German like a Saxon, which has frequently been the case, I have felt not a little flattered. Judge, then, how I have been mortified to be told by a fair Mohawk that I was an outlandish man or an Irisher and did not understand their language, although I had made out to learn a few words. The German and Herkimer Flats are very fine tracts of bottom land, and in the highest state of cultivation, and from the great depth of the soil, as well as from logs and trees being frequently found in digging for wells. They were, in all probability, at some remote period, the bottoms of lakes. Kanajihari and Little Falls are the only two towns that lie immediately upon the river throughout the whole distance from Schenectady to Utica. The former is a scattered village on the left bank, about 45 miles from Schenectady. The latter about 13 miles farther up, situated on the right bank, in a rocky and barren country, of little value except for mill seats. It consists at present of 30 houses, and must in time become a very considerable manufacturing place, from the ease and facility with which mills may be erected. About a quarter of a mile before arriving at the falls are two places called the Devil's Hole and Devil's Oven. And from the description I had received, I expected to find a cavern large enough, at least, to contain a church, when lo, an examination, they appeared to be only small accidental excavations in the side of a rocky mountain, about the size of a common oven, with a very large mouth. From the great number of small excavations that are continually forming, it is evident that they have been produced in consequence of a pebble or stone becoming accidentally lodged in a small cavity of the rocks, where, the force of the water giving it a rotary motion, the cavity has grown with every overflowing of the river, which, when high, rushes directly into these holes. On the approach to the falls, the scenery of the country experiences a sudden and picturesque change. The river becomes contracted to about 1/3 its usual breadth. On each side, the mountains rise to a towering height, the sides of which, although inaccessible, are covered with lofty trees, which fasten their roots in the fissures and crevices of the rocks, and firmly maintain their station in spite of storms and tempests, while, as you advance, the river seems lost in a wilderness of rocks and precipices. In ascending these falls, you pass through 8 locks into the canal, where each ton of merchandise pays a toll of $2.25, besides a toll of from $1.50 to $2.62.5 on each boat. This expense paid by the captain of the boat. It is, however, certainly too high, and is generally complained of. Not that the proprietors receive too great profits from these works, which, on the contrary, are at present rather a sinking fund, and must continue so until the number of boats employed on this river is increased in a 10-fold degree. This ought to be an object of the first importance with the company, for the heavy charges paid by the few that navigate these waters tend to discourage others from building boats. The farmers still continue to transport their produce by land in preference to water, as each has his team, which will carry 100 bushels. They generally go to town once or twice a year to dispose of their crops, see their friends, and look for great bargains at auctions. And, when ready to return, can take back a load as cheap as the boatman who passes the locks. Besides, they have not only saved in this respect, but also a charge of 1 or 2 shillings a bushel on all they bring, for it is generally known that a farmer of this description, by taking his provisions with him, will not spend more than $1 or $2 during the trip. The great object of the company, therefore, should be to encourage the use of boats and endeavor to increase their number, and, by that means, divert the land carriage to the river. This never can be effected while the present mode is persisted in, and were they to lower the toll 50%, I should still say it was too high. In my opinion, they seem rather to have calculated upon high tolls and few boats. Experience, however, will soon teach them to consider the subject in a different light. The canal, which is 4 or 5 miles long, is a beautiful piece of water, passing through the flats of the town of Herkimer. It is a valuable acquisition to those through whose lands it flows, and when once planted with handsome trees, will be one of the pleasantest situations in this country. On the left, it is joined by Oriskany Creek, a small stream which passes through a large and extensive flat of the same name, but mostly unimproved. It was at this spot the famous battle was fought by General Herkimer with the Indians, in which he lost his life. The afternoon of my arrival at Utica, we encountered a violent thundersquall, which I should not have noticed to you had not a large tree immediately opposite to us been struck with lightning and fallen into the river, so that although drowning is scarcely possible on the Mohawk, yet there is some risk of being dashed to pieces by the falling of trees which overhang its banks. Utica, on the site of Fort Schuyler, is a flourishing village, handsomely situated on the left bank of the Mohawk. It contains, at present, about 160 houses, the greatest part of which are painted white and give it a neat and lively appearance. Foreign goods are nearly as cheap here as in New York, which, I presume, is owing to the merchants underselling each other, for this, like all other country towns, is overstocked with shopkeepers. Most of the goods intended for the salt works are loaded here in wagons and sent on overland, a distance of 50 miles. The carriage over this portage is 50 cents a hundredweight. Whitestown is also a thriving little village, 4 miles above Utica, but as it stands about half a mile back from the shore, nothing of it is seen in the passage up the river. Deerfield lies on the right bank of the Mohawk, immediately opposite to Utica, and is connected with it by a good wooden bridge. It is but an inconsiderable village of 8 or 10 houses, chiefly inhabited by very poor people, nor is it likely ever to rise to any degree of respectability, as the ground on which it is situated is subject to be overflowed whenever there is any considerable rise of the river. The Mohawk affords the fewest fish of any stream I have ever yet met with. Angling, you know, is my favorite sport, and as I had promised myself much gratification from this amusement, I spared nothing that could render my fishing apparatus complete. Judge then of my patience and disappointment when, after 9 days toiling, day and night, I at last caught a poor catfish, not larger than a herring. I hope, however, in a few days, to be amply compensated for my disappointment here, as we shall then be at the head of the Mohawk, and from thence descend with the waters flowing into Lake Ontario, which our captain informs me abounds with salmon and other delicious fish. Yet even here I perceive another difficulty presents itself, which is that nature has been so bountiful to the salmon of this country in furnishing them with quantities of delicious food as to make them reject the very best tidbit you can affix to your hook, so that unless you are expert enough to strike them with a spear, as is the custom, you are likely to go without. I really must confess that my feelings seem rather to revolt at the barbarous and unnatural idea of murdering fish with a large piece of iron, weighing 3 or 4 pounds, when, at the same time, a little bit of crooked steel, covered with a fly or worm and suspended to a line, would afford me, for hours, what I should call rational amusement. Such is the force of habit and prejudice. The manly attitude of the Indian, standing erect in his canoe as he skims the transparent surface of the lake, grasping his iron spear with his right hand, warns the quick-eyed salmon of his hostile approach, while we, more humane and refined, conceal ourselves under the thick foliage of the shady banks, and, in the guise of friendship, beguile the unwary tribe to the deceitful hook. Yours, C.S. Thank you for viewing this production from Keeping New York History Alive. See you next time.